Now I'd like to focus a little bit more on key points that I want everyone to know about stuttering so we're on the same page. This is all in the manual that Andrea and I have been working on. And so I'm going to take, this is the first key point, and there's a lot there, so I'm going to break it up. And the first part of that, along with stuttering is complex and it's multidimensional, is the fact that this could be a disorder that may persist through the school years and beyond. And that's going to be really affecting both our assessment and our treatment. And here's a little bit, and I had students memorize this as well. I said, you kind of know this. So children who stutter, CWS, at 4 years has a real high chance of recovery, both with and without therapy, like 80%. So our assessment for early childhood may really has to take in effect with the question of, do we start treating this child? Do we wait and see? And to do that, we have to look at the research and the risk factors. A child who stutters at 6 years, that chance of natural recovery goes down around 50%. 10 years, much less. Now, we never know what it's going to be for an individual child. I think that's important to say, but in the back of our mind, we should know these kind of numbers that as a child gets older. So what does that mean for assessment? We need to have the cognitive shift for this older child that it's not all about the frequency of stuttering. We may shift from working on the stuttering to working on maybe a child at 4 years old. Our goal may be fluency. The goal may not be fluency for an older child, but it would be helping the school-age child reach their communication potential. So if we're doing an assessment, we would want to know everything about their communication strengths and weaknesses. Another key point is that fluency disorders such as stuttering require a comprehensive assessment that uncovers the full range of the speech behavior. So here I'm talking about speech sample analysis, the speech behaviors. And what does this mean for its assessment is that we want to not rely on a sole speech sample to determine eligibility. We want to sample across environments, maybe ask for the parents to send a recording of speech, observations in the classroom, maybe across different linguistic tasks. And I'll go into that in a little more depth on subsequent slides. Other key point would be that fluency doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, if you ever talk to a dentist, saying your whole body's involved, it's just not your teeth. Your teeth your dental health can affect your whole body and kind of vice versa. And you do need to look at contributing factors to the disfluency, such as the child's articulation and language skills, their temperament, their attitudes and emotion, and any coexisting diagnosis. So what does that mean? We really have to get a thorough case history, and that may mean testing beyond speech samples. And doing maybe some rating scales and definitely getting language information. And then looking at the thoughts and attitudes and emotions of the student in a very systematic way. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is so different. It really isn't, because in other communication disorders, you're also doing all these other things, aren't we? We're gathering background information to fill out the evaluation, we're observing the child, et cetera, et cetera. What may be different with fluency is this variability, which has confounded people who deal with people who stutter, has confounded children who stutter, researchers, is that there's so much variability with stuttering, and it can be individuals across individuals. So people who work with stuttering quite a bit have this kind of joke that if you meet one child who stutters, you meet one child who stutters. There's that much difference between children who stutter. It can differ on age groups across the lifespan, how it may ebb and flow across different ages and times. Within the individual, they can say that they have a good fluency day, good speaking day, and a bad speaking day. or the settings can influence them, or the actual language tasks. I know a boy who I worked with in the schools, because of a variety of things that happened to him, he was very, oral reading was very difficult for him, even though he was a very gifted child. He had more stuttering oral reading, but better in conversation. And then the next child you meet could be really good oral reading because there's no language formulation, but conversation is more impacted. So you want to see what it is for the individual. And I put under in red that when you uncover those contexts that are more or less challenging for the individual child, you've done important work in towards making a goal. So if the child has a relative impairment or a difference, a discrepancy in showing more fluency in oral reading, that may be a goal to make oral reading easier for that child, or to figure out what modifications can be made to help that child enjoy their small reading group better. And then I want to spend a few moments talking about preschool. So with preschool, it's really a different, quite a different thing than older school age. And sometimes the age that I find the most troublesome is around that 5-6 age. They're not quite preschool, but they're not quite school age. And the ones that are, you know, in our schools, we start with like 3, so 3 to 5 would be kind of the preschool. We want to look at risk factors for persistent stuttering, and I'll have some questions at the end to guide our decision making. The questions that will come up from parents, whether you're working at a child find event, or perhaps you have a child on your caseload and the parents picking the child up sees you and says, oh my gosh, you know, this happened to Johnny's little brother, and what should I do? They want to know, when is a wait and see a good option for my child? And you want to know, when is wait and see a good option for the child that I have to advise on? What should we be looking for, parents or SLPs, or what should we be doing during any wait and see interval? And when should a child be referred, a preschool child, I should specify, for an evaluation and possible treatment? So those are the questions that might be coming up for preschool. And here are some basic facts. I think I just have one slide on basic facts, but things I think that are important to know about the onset of stuttering and how it can guide and help us answer those questions parents may ask. So almost all stuttering occurs between the ages of 2 to 4, about 95%. So there can be later onsets, but they're much more rare. It occurs during the time of rapid language development. So if an onset occurs after this age, that could be a risk factor. Sudden onsets are not uncommon. Now, in previous work, if you went to graduate school many, many years ago, some of the common knowledge was that, oh, children start stuttering in a very easier way, and then it becomes much more tense or moves to blocks and prolongations at later ages. And there's been some research that says that's not the case. There can be children who have a sudden onset within 1 to 3 days, and some of those sudden onsets can be quite severe. So it's not like they've learned the behavior. And so they're looking at it, if we look at it as a neurological impairment, so there's some miswirings going on there. What's really important is that parents can be so understandably so concerned when their young preschool child starts stuttering suddenly and maybe with severity. And what we can now say to them is that at onset, the severity does not predict persistence. It's not uncommon that their onset can be rapid. And what we're looking for is we are looking for some decrease in the severity over time, definitely by 6 to 12 months, but maybe even a little bit sooner. And so the risk factors if we've got this kind of information about onset behind us, the risk factors for persistent stuttering is family history. And also they now have research to show that it's not only family history, but what's the pattern? Has the family member persisted in stuttering, or is that family member no longer stuttering, which can be a follow-up question on a case history. Sometimes parents report there's no family history, and I'll ask them, how do you know? I mean, have you ever discussed it with family members? And I'll encourage them to bring it up on a phone call or the next family gathering. And a case in point, when I told my mother I was going to work towards board certification for fluency and stuttering, she told me, "Oh, did you know that your brother stuttered for a period of time?" And I'm like, "No, you never told me, Mom." Which it never came up. And I was in my 50s at the time. It's interesting too, because she was told by the doctor to ignore the stuttering and it'll go away, which was common in the around the 1950s, going from Wendell Johnson's diagnosogenic theory, which basically just said parents cause the stuttering by mislabeling it. And we know now that is not the case. So anyway, a little bit of a digression. So another risk factor is onset after 3 years and 5 months after this period of language development. There is a gender bias towards males at birth persisting. At the time of onset, females and males are about the same, or maybe slightly more biological males at onset, but then by adolescence, that goes to that 4-to-1 ratio that I think a lot of people might be familiar for. Stuttering under 6 months to a year is pretty common, but when it starts becoming towards 6 months more towards the year, that can be a risk factor that it may need intervention. And other risk factors is that up to like almost half of children who stutter, CWS, have phonological impairment. And that kind of makes sense. If talking's hard and you're not able to say sounds or you're not being understood, a child could get this idea of of communicating more difficult. Risk factors would be any language delays or advanced language indiscrepancies between language skills, and co-occurring diagnosis, sensitive temperament, and even parent-caregiver negative reactions, or the child is starting to show negative reactions, would be a risk factor. Here is some preschool case study questions. And I know they're a little bit leading, but I wanted to show how, if you base your decision at a screening, kind of a child find event, or even during an evaluation that had been referred, based on the stuttering behaviors only, and not taking account the risk factors, you could be let off base. So here's the first one. You see a girl who just turned 3 at a child find event. She shows tons of stuttering when talking. Parents report no family history, onset within the last week, no other speech language concerns, but they are worried about the severity. So what this shows is that it's a sudden onset, so they haven't been stuttering that long at all last week. There's no family history, biologically female at birth, onset, no other speech and language concerns, and they're worried about the severity. So we can tell them children sometimes are quite severe and they have a sudden onset, but we should be seeing some gradual decrease. I have a slide later about what you could go into more detail in this kind of a case. The next one would be the opposite, is you're doing an evaluation of a 4-year-old boy that parents requested, but you only notice mild stuttering, if at all, like you're kind of trying to find it. But there's a case history and you know that there is a family history of stuttering that's persisting. He has been stuttering with cyclical severity. That means it kind of gets better and then worse and then better and worse, but it stays for a year. Concerns about speech sound production. Parents report a sensitive temperament with perfectionist tendencies, and they have noticed that he is saying never mind or walking away with stuttering. So you don't see any stuttering during the speech exam, we don't need to go further. We can say doesn't qualify. Is that right? And I'm hoping people are shaking their heads. No, this child is loaded with risk factors. And asking for a home speech sample would be a good next step if you haven't already done that. But there's so many risk factors there that it would be a case where the mild speech sample in one point of time could be very misleading. So here's some suggestions. If you're suggesting a monitoring period for the parent, I use the Litcomb daily ratings, and I actually have a tab, so I'll see if we can go to that. And then if I meet them or if I talk to them on the phone now that I'm in private practice, I'll discuss the rating scale and encourage them to do a daily rating. I know it's hard, it could be variable, but what would you overall give your child for the day? And to keep track on a daily basis the severity. So with 8 being the worst stuttering imaginable. And sometimes I calibrate that if there's a video, sometimes not even the child's video. I might pull up a video online and say, what rating would you give this child? And then we'll discuss that, oh yeah, you heard stuttering, so it's got to be above 0, but it was pretty obvious, so we got to put it above 2. There was some secondary characteristics, some child going like this, or the child looking away during the stutter, so we maybe want to add another point. So I'll go over that, and so that's something they feel that they can do. And then if they come back after a few months, you have all this data points of where the child is. You're seeing that the points are not going down in severity or maybe even going up, which should indicate maybe we should have go to an evaluation and a treatment. You can also talk to parents about dates. So if it's not getting better, why don't you drop me an email or a line in a month or 2 months or 3 months. There is, an SFA video online, 7 tips for talking with your child. And I gave you the link there. You can have them view that. Always reduce possible feelings of guilt. That, give them some education that it's something a lot of children go through. Up to 10% of children have a period of stuttering. It's not something that you did. It's just a neurological sensitivity, and most children grow out. And keep on loving your child. Look at the 7 tips for talking with your child, but it is not your fault. And if decision is an evaluation, then I have some bullets, but I'm not going to spend a lot because this will be very similar to the school age case. So all these things go through. I'm looking here. I think the only difference would be the first 2 bullets. It's really in the preschool time that I have parents start collecting ratings. I might have them with school age, but I might not use that for the evaluation. So that would be there. And then taking the risk factors and putting those into the report. I would definitely put that into the report. Well, this is the rating form that I give out to parents to start logging, and they're savvy. They can do it on their phone or whatever. But I want to also show you, we're going to use a chart. Now, this chart is from my mentor for board certification, Kristen Camella, and I haven't gotten her permission yet to use it, but we'll use something like that. But if you go to the Stuttering Foundation website, you can actually find a risk factor chart under the preschool tab, both preschool and ratings. So, but we're going to have something like this, if not this, in the documents to you, so that you would have the risk factors for developmental stuttering for those young preschool students.